Welcome to the clothing exercise. We are going to be using the database that we worked through normalizing in the earlier videos that you just followed along with. And so we're going to look at how to create those normalized tables in our database and then use some SQL queries to come up with results that we want to show. So remember, this was our end result. We had three tables. One that it showed the items and their colors. We had another table that showed the items and the price, and a final table that showed price and tax. Well, we need to go ahead and create these since we've already gone through the process of normalizing them in our database. So I'm going to go out to my MySQL workbench, which I have already pulled up here, and I'm just going to get this so we can kind of see both in the same screen. Okay, so I have the MySQL workbench here on the right, and we have the normalization example on the left. So what we're going to do now is create those tables that we need. So go locate your database, find your tables, and just like we did in the prior lab, you'll go ahead and create a new table. I've actually already got these created, so let's just pull them up and take a look at where I started and why, so that you can kind of go through this as well. So the first one I created is called clothing. And let me just open up the first part so you can see how to actually set up the table. I named this one clothing. And what this one is actually this table right here. It's actually the second table. And the reason I started with this is it has one item listed for each of our clothing items. So I thought that would be a good place to start, and we can give it then its own primary key to identify in the other table. So what I've done is I have created an ID column called clothing ID. And the reason I didn't just call it ID is I wanted to be able to identify it with a particular table. And since this is the clothing table, I decided to call it clothing ID. It is an integer. I left the default as far as the numbers. It is a primary key. It cannot be null. It is also, I'm referring to this one as a unique key, meaning it cannot be duplicated on this page. And I'm using auto increment, so anytime I add additional clothing, it will continually update that number and give it its own unique identifier. Then I created a column called item. That is this column. This is where I actually describe what they are. I used variable characters and said that it's going to have a maximum of 45 characters. For what we're doing, that was perfectly fine. And then the last one is what is referred to as a foreign key, and you're going to see where this gets used. So I called it price underscore ID. So there's that ID again. This one is also an integer, and I left it at its default. It's a primary key, and it cannot be null, but it's not unique, meaning we could have multiples with this same price in this particular table. It also does not auto increment because we would put it in to match the price from a different table. So now we have this table set up. Let's go and look at what we need to add to it. So I'm going to go back down here to my clothing table. I'm going to find the one with the little lightning bolt next to it, and I'm going to click that. And here are my columns. So I have clothing ID, item, and price ID. For right now, ignore price ID. We'll come back to it, but we need to put in our items. We only have 3 items. Don't worry about the numbers over on this side because remember, those items in clothing ID were auto incremented. They are auto incremented, so they are going to update as soon as you put the items in there. So go ahead and place the items in, so just t-shirt, polo shirt, and sweatshirt, and then click apply, and it will update. When it updates, it should look very similar to mine, except that you won't have the price ID yet. Let's go create that price table. So what we're going to do now is create this other small table, and I'm going to go find that one. I called mine clothing price, And notice it's an underscore. I have given it the column ID of price ID. So this is the one that matches over on our clothing table. So let me bounce back there. There is my price ID. It matches in its spelling exactly to this. And each one of these is then going to be associated with a price and with a tax amount. So we're going to put in price ID, and on this table, it's the primary key, it cannot be null, and it's unique, and it can be auto-incremented. So remember, over here, because it's what is referred to as a foreign key over here, it's just primary, and I'm saying it can't be null, but it's not unique, and it's not auto-incremented, because it auto-increments over here. Once you have these things set up, and let's just go through here real quick. So price ID is an integer. Price is decimal. And if you remember from the last exercise, 65 is the one that talks about how accurate or how many digits it'll go out for accuracy. And then after the comma, 2 is going to tell us how many spaces. And since this is dollars, we're going 2 spaces after the decimal point. Likewise, we did the same with tax. So now let's take a look at what we need to add into this table. So here it is. Again, don't worry about putting in price ID because now this is going to auto increment because we're in the clothing price table. Add your prices that are over from the Excel sheet. So we've got 15, 22, and 35. And then we have the appropriate tax. So plug those numbers in and then click apply. So now you'll have ID numbers that get associated with each of these prices. Since we now have ID numbers, let's go back to our clothing table and add in those foreign keys. So now I'm on the editing one. So this is the one that's got the little lightning bolt versus the wrench. And this price ID column that was empty for you, now we're going to associate the two. So I've used the ID number of 1 here to coincide with the 1 here saying that it's $15 and the tax will be 83 cents. Likewise, polo shirt, I put in 2 because it's $22, so it should match what's over here, and the tax is $1.21. Finally, I put in 3 for sweatshirt. So those 2 tables are finished. We just have one more to do, which is this large table, and I called that one clothing colors. So I'm going to open up that and we'll see what we need to add. Okay, so I called this particular table clothing underscore colors. We have 3 columns here. We have one called colors ID, and it is the unique ID number for this particular table. So it'll associate with each item as it displays out. Then we have a clothing ID, which actually should be a primary key in this case because clothing underscore ID is coming from clothing table, and there's our clothing ID. So they again need to match. So let's go back out to that one, clothing colors. And then of course we have the color field or the color column, and that's where we describe what actual color this is. And this one I used variable characters and left it at the default of 45. I honestly don't know a color that takes more than 45 characters. And we left that all entirely blank. So if we don't have a color, then that's okay. Go ahead and make sure that all of these are saved as you've been working through them. And then let's go through and go to colors and open up the table. So now we can edit this, and here is what we need to add. Clothing ID. If we remember, we go back to clothing, our clothing ID was associated, 1 is associated with t-shirt, 2 is with polo shirt, and 3 is with sweatshirt. So I'm going to go back into my clothing colors table, and under clothing ID, I know I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 t-shirts. So each of them gets 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Then I went through and in the color column, I did each color. So 1 color per record. So we have red, blue, gray, yellow, and pink. So red, blue, gray, yellow, and pink. Next up, I know I have 3 polo shirts. So I'm going to put in my 3 polo shirts. They are all with the number 2 because again, if we go back to our clothing table, polo shirts are assigned the clothing ID of 2. So we have 3 of those. And then we put in each of their colors. We have green, blue, black, green, blue, black. And then the last ones that we need to put in is our sweatshirts. And they were assigned the clothing ID of 3. And we put in their colors. So gray, blue, black from over here. Again, don't worry about what shows up in the colors ID column, because that is the auto-incremented unique identifier for this particular table. Once you have this, click Save. Now you have all 3 of these tables, and you have appropriate keys and foreign keys associated with each of these tables. Now let's go see how we actually join them together in our code.